A famous actress is discharged from the hospital after a filming accident and discovers that the accident was orchestrated by another actress to steal her role in the film. Claire Sullivan wasn't just a movie star, she was an icon. Her presence on Hollywood screens was not only striking but magnetic, attracting millions of fans around the world. At 35, Claire had already won the most prestigious awards in the industry, including 3 Oscars and countless other recognitions. Her intense green eyes and soft yet powerful voice captivated any audience, making each of her roles a true work of art. But Claire wasn't content with the shine of fame. She was a perfectionist. In every project, she poured her heart and soul into it, always seeking more than what the script offered. Her dedication was legendary. During the filming of her new feature, Winter's Dawn, Claire spent hours on set, reviewing every detail, discussing scenes with the director, and even helping her co-stars perfect their performances. The film promised to be a landmark in her career, a masterpiece that demanded the utmost from every actor. Claire played a complex character, a woman torn between love and revenge, a duality that resonated with her own pursuit of perfection in real life. The set of Winter's Dawn was a place of intense activity. The cameras captured every movement, every expression, while the crew rushed to adjust the lights and sets. Claire always arrived early, often before anyone else. She liked to observe the environment, absorb the energy of the set, mentally preparing herself for the day's work. There was a fierce determination in her eyes, an insatiable desire to create something grand, something that went beyond expectations. Between takes, Claire mingled with the production crew, exchanging ideas and suggestions. Although she was a renowned star, her humility and willingness to listen made her beloved by everyone. She knew the names of every crew member and made a point of greeting them each day. For Claire, cinema was a collective effort, and everyone on set, from the director to the production assistant, contributed to the film's success. In meetings with the director, Claire was assertive but always open to new interpretations. Her suggestions were met with respect, as everyone knew her vision was sharp and her artistic sense impeccable. She insisted on repeating scenes until she was completely satisfied, often to the exasperation of her colleagues, but the final result always justified the effort. When Claire was on screen, it was impossible to look away. She commanded everyone's attention with a performance that seemed to transcend mere acting. At home, away from the spotlight, Claire led a more reserved life. Her refuge was a house in Malibu, where she spent the few free hours she had reading scripts and studying characters. But even in her free time, Claire didn't disconnect from her career. She mentally reviewed scenes, planned new approaches, and often made notes that she would bring to the set the next day. Her dedication was almost obsessive, but for Claire, this was the only way to achieve excellence. The cast of Winter's Dawn included big names, but Claire was undeniably the star. Her presence in the project had attracted the media's and critics' attention, who were already speculating about another possible Oscar nomination. However, Claire remained focused, immune to rumors and praise. For her, the real victory was in fully committing to the role, in creating a character that resonated deeply and unforgettable with the audience. The day began like any other on the set of Winter's Dawn. Claire arrived early, as usual, ready for another challenging scene. The scene required precise choreography, a high-speed chase through the narrow streets of a fictional European city, with cars passing within inches of her body. Although the risk was high, Claire trusted the stunt team and the technicians who had prepared everything down to the smallest detail. The director was excited, and Claire, immersed in her role, felt the adrenaline pumping through her veins. Everything seemed in place. When the cameras started rolling, Claire sprang into action. Her face was serious, reflecting the tension of her character. She ran through the set, dodging obstacles as rehearsed. However, something felt strange, an unsettling feeling that Claire couldn't shake. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed through the air. What should have been a controlled maneuver went out of control, and one of the cars collided violently with the structure where Claire was, throwing her to the ground with brutal force. The impact was so sudden that no one had time to react. The set, once vibrant with energy, plunged into terrifying silence. The director, actors, and crew ran desperately towards Claire, who lay motionless on the ground. There was a pool of blood around her, and her body seemed fragile and broken. Her breathing was shallow, almost non-existent, and her face was pale, marked by cuts and bruises. Claire's eyes, usually so full of life, were half closed, struggling to stay conscious. The ambulance siren soon echoed across the set, but for everyone watching in shock, each second felt like an eternity. On the way to the hospital, Claire drifted in and out of consciousness. Fragments of memories and scenes from the film mixed in her confused mind. The city's lights blurred past the ambulance window as the paramedics fought to stabilize her. Claire felt excruciating pain throughout her body, but what tormented her most was the doubt about what had really happened. How had that scene, so carefully planned, turned into a tragedy? When the ambulance arrived at the hospital, Claire was immediately taken to the emergency room. Doctors and nurses worked frantically to stop the bleeding and assess the extent of the damage. The following hours were a blur of worried faces, bright lights, and voices that seemed distant. Claire couldn't understand everything they were saying, but the serious expressions of the healthcare professionals spoke more than any words. Something was gravely wrong, and the gravity of the situation began to sink into her still confused mind. While Claire was under intensive care, news of the accident spread quickly through Hollywood. The sensationalist media wasted no time creating bombastic headlines, speculating about the star's condition. Paparazzi surrounded the hospital, and concerned fans sent messages of support on social media. But inside the hospital, Claire was isolated from all this, fighting a silent battle for her life and sanity. The doctors did their best to stabilize her, but they knew the recovery would be long and painful. The days passed slowly, with Claire in a state of semi-consciousness. She had moments of lucidity, but most of the time she was immersed in a deep, restless sleep, filled with disturbing dreams and flashes of the accident. In one of these brief moments of wakefulness, Claire felt a familiar hand holding hers. It was Ava Monroe, her rival on screen and in real life, who stood by her side with a genuinely concerned expression. "You'll get through this, Claire," Ava said, her voice choked with emotion. "We're all rooting for you." But there was something in Ava's words that sounded hollow, as if a shadow hung over that declaration of support. Despite the encouraging words, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As her physical health slowly began to improve, her mind kept circling around the accident. She remembered confusing details, a distant conversation, a suspicious look from someone on set, but nothing made sense. Each day, the need to understand what had really happened grew within her, fueled by a growing suspicion she couldn't ignore. When Claire finally managed to speak with her agent, he appeared visibly shaken. "Claire, the important thing is that you get well. Don't worry about the film right now," he said, trying to sound reassuring. But Claire noticed the hesitation in his voice, the way he avoided her eyes. In the hospital corridors, the buzz about the accident was increasing. Some of the production crew had started whispering about possible sabotage, but no one dared to say anything concrete. The nights in the hospital were long and lonely for Claire. The silence of the place was only interrupted by the rhythmic sound of the machines beside her, monitoring every beat of her heart, every breath. But when she closed her eyes, the silence was replaced by a whirlwind of disturbing images and sounds. Vivid nightmares haunted her, taking her back to the set, to the exact moment of the accident. She relived the scene repeatedly, but with one difference. In her dreams, there was always a shadowy figure, watching her from afar, with malicious intentions. Claire woke up gasping, her heart racing, and cold sweat running down her forehead. Each nightmare felt more real than the last, and the fear she felt didn't disappear upon waking. Instead, it stayed with her, permeating every corner of her hospital room. It wasn't just the nightmares that troubled her, but a sense that someone or something was constantly lurking. The daily visits from the medical team, once comforting, now left her uneasy. These experiences began to affect Claire's emotional state. She couldn't shake the feeling that the accident wasn't just a simple mishap, but the result of something much darker. The idea of a conspiracy against her grew stronger with each new piece of evidence, no matter how subtle. Paranoia mixed with reality, making it difficult to discern what was a product of her imagination and what was really happening around her. Claire, once confident and strong, felt increasingly vulnerable and alone. As the days turned into weeks, the nightmares became more intense and the disturbing intuitions more frequent. Claire spent hours awake, trying to piece together the puzzle in her mind. Claire Sullivan was finally discharged. After weeks confined between white sheets and fluorescent lights, the world outside the hospital seemed strangely brighter and more vibrant. But at the same time, there was something oppressive in the air, as if the shadows that chased her during the nightmares were still nearby, ready to reappear at any moment. The studio driver was waiting for her at the hospital door, ready to take her home. Claire gave one last look at the building before getting into the car, relieved to be leaving that chapter behind, but anxious about what lay ahead. Claire's physical recovery was far from complete. Although she could walk and move, she felt constant muscle pain, and her movements were slow, requiring physical therapy. However, the real burden she carried was not in her body, but in her mind. The questions kept echoing. How did that accident happen? She had always been meticulous with her scenes, and the crew was known for their precision. It was hard to believe it was just a technical error. Something inside her, an increasingly strong intuition, warned her of a greater danger. The days that followed were filled with medical appointments and physical therapy, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger behind the accident. During one of the appointments, while waiting to be seen, she met one of the technicians from the film set, who was also at the hospital. He seemed surprised to see her. "Claire, I thought you knew." "I thought they had already told you," he said, hesitating. Claire frowned. "Told me what?" she asked, and the technician quickly covered up, muttering that he had made a mistake before hurrying off. This made Claire even more suspicious. Back at her home, Claire began to mentally revisit the day of the accident, searching for some clue. Then she decided to contact some of the film crew members to see if anyone had noticed anything strange. It was when one of the camera operators mentioned something that made her freeze. "The car was programmed to stop just inches from you, Claire. But strangely, there was a brake system failure. Yet, the technical review found no mechanical issues before filming. This has never happened before." These words spun in Claire's head for hours. How was it possible for something so carefully controlled to fail so catastrophically? She tried to ignore the idea of sabotage, but the hypothesis became inevitable. Someone, somewhere, wanted to take her out of the picture. But who, and why? Determined to find answers, Claire began to investigate discreetly. She made phone calls, requested the production records to be checked, and reviewed the behind-the-scenes footage. It wasn't long before she discovered small irregularities, details that at first glance seemed insignificant, but together painted a more sinister picture. The clues began to point in a disturbing direction. At first, Claire didn't want to believe it, but a series of coincidences linked Ava Monroe's name to the day of the accident. Ava, her longtime rival, had always been around, occupying the same space as Claire in Hollywood. And on that fateful morning, Ava had arrived earlier than usual on set, something that at the time had not caught anyone's attention. The doubts began to turn into conviction. Claire recalled Ava's evasive words at the hospital, the strange silence between them when they met. But why would Ava do something so extreme? The competitiveness between them had always existed, but this was betrayal on another level. Now, Claire had no choice. She would have to confront Ava directly. And she knew that from this encounter, the truth would finally emerge. A truth that could forever change the course of their lives. Claire decided that the confrontation couldn't wait. The doubts were eating her up inside, and the idea that Ava, her old rival, might be responsible for the accident was unbearable. The setting for the meeting was carefully chosen. A discreet cafe, far from the curious eyes of Hollywood, where they could talk without interruptions. Claire arrived first, nervous but determined. When Ava walked in, the tension in the air intensified. She wore an elegant coat and dark glasses that hid her eyes, but not the serious expression on her face. Ava slowly approached, as if she felt the weight of what was to come. As she sat down, she removed her glasses, revealing an inquisitive but cautious look. "Claire, you wanted to see me." "It's good to know you're better," Ava began, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Claire remained firm, watching every move, every word. "We need to talk, Ava," Claire said bluntly, "about what really happened on that set." Claire's voice was firm, but there was a contained anguish, anger mixed with the fear of discovering that her suspicion was correct. Ava leaned back in her chair, maintaining the composure that had always characterized her, but Claire noticed a slight tension in her gestures. "What are you talking about, Claire?" "The accident was a tragedy, but why do you think I had something to do with it?" Ava responded, with a false calmness that didn't fool Claire. "Because everything points to you," Claire replied, her voice becoming more assertive. "You were there that morning, arrived earlier than ever. The brake system was sabotaged, and no one else would have a reason to do that, except someone who wanted my role." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and laden with implications. Ava didn't show surprise, but her eyes darkened, and for a moment Claire thought she saw a spark of anger. "Claire, you're being paranoid," Ava said, colder now. "Yes, I arrived early, but only because I wanted to discuss some scenes with the director. That doesn't mean anything." Ava's response was logical, but Claire wasn't easily convinced. "You've always wanted what I had, Ava," Claire continued, her voice lower but full of emotion. "Always competing for every role, every opportunity. But this goes beyond competition, don't you think? This is a crime." Ava looked directly into Claire's eyes, and for an instant, the cafe seemed to disappear around them, leaving only the two of them in an emotional battlefield. "I would never do that, Claire. I may be ambitious, but I'm not a criminal," Ava replied, with a sincerity that Claire wasn't prepared to face. For a moment, silence reigned between them, heavy and full of uncertainties. Claire wanted to believe Ava, wanted to believe that their rivalry would never reach this point. But the doubts were like poison, spreading quickly, making any clarity of thought impossible. "If it wasn't you, Ava, then who?" Claire finally asked, more to herself than to Ava. She felt disarmed, as if the ground beneath her feet was beginning to crumble. Ava, on the other hand, relaxed slightly, as if feeling the tension dissipate. Ava leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her eyes finally meeting Claire's with unexpected intensity. "Claire, I know we weren't the best of friends, but there was always respect between us. If you think it was me, you're mistaken. But I can understand why you'd think that. Still, you need to look elsewhere. There are many people interested in seeing you out of the game, and not all of them are as obvious as I am." Ava's words hung in the air, leaving Claire more confused than before. Why did Ava seem so genuine now? The certainty she had brought with her to this meeting began to waver. Claire watched as Ava stood up, grabbed her glasses, and put them back on. "I hope you find the answers you're looking for, Claire. And if you need help, I'm here." With those words, Ava left the cafe, and Claire was left alone, her head full of doubts and her heart heavy. After the confrontation with Ava, Claire felt a strange mix of relief and frustration. Ava had denied it with such conviction that Claire's certainties began to crumble. She found herself replaying every word, every expression, trying to find some contradiction that would confirm her suspicion. Back at her apartment, Claire spent hours mentally reviewing the events of the day of the accident. Her mind, once sharp, was now a labyrinth of doubts. Why would Ava be involved? The reasons seemed obvious at first. Rivalry, ambition, the desire to take over the leading role. But what if the sabotage had come from someone unexpected, someone off the radar? The doubt began to eat away at Claire from the inside, turning what was once a mission of revenge into a desperate search for answers. The next morning, Claire decided to return to the set, even though filming had been temporarily suspended. The place was now deserted, with only a few technicians dismantling sets. She walked among the half-dismantled structures, trying to relive what had happened on that fateful day. While exploring the set, Claire encountered one of the crew members who had been there on the day of the accident. He seemed uncomfortable, avoiding her gaze when he saw her. "Something is slipping through my fingers," she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed the desperation that was beginning to take hold. "Did you notice anything strange that day? Anything that didn't seem right?" The man hesitated, nervously fiddling with the tools he was holding. I don't know, Claire. Honestly, I don't remember anything unusual. But I did hear rumors, whispered conversations. Nothing concrete." That vague response only increased Claire's frustration. Rumors, whispered conversations, but no real proof. Everything seemed intangible, like sand slipping through her fingers. The more she investigated, the more she seemed to drown in uncertainties. With every lead she followed, the more confusing the plot became. Claire needed a safe harbor, someone she could trust, someone who could help her unravel the chaos that her life had become. Her agent, Mark Weston, had always been that pillar of support. Mark wasn't just her agent, he was a friend, a confidant, someone who always put her interest first. Now, more than ever, Claire needed his advice, his clarity. They met at a small bistro they used to frequent during the hectic days of negotiations and meetings. The atmosphere was cozy, with soft lighting and the sound of jazz playing in the background, a stark contrast to the internal storm Claire was facing. Mark was already there when she arrived, standing up immediately to hug her. "Claire, how are you feeling?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Claire felt momentarily relieved to hear that familiar voice, as if the world was finally beginning to stabilize. Seated, Claire began to pour out her doubts and fears. She told him about the confrontation with Ava, the disconnected clues, and the suspicions that couldn't align. Mark listened attentively, without interrupting, his blue eyes reflecting the intensity of what Claire was sharing. He had always been a good listener, someone who knew exactly when to speak and when to simply be present. When Claire finally finished, exhausted and confused, Mark leaned forward, taking her hand. "Claire, we'll figure out what's going on. I'm with you. As I've always been." Those words were exactly what Claire needed to hear. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Mark began to ask detailed questions, trying to help Claire organize her thoughts. "Do you remember anything else about the day of the accident? Something that might have gone unnoticed?" Claire reflected, searching her memory for any detail that might be relevant. But the confusion still clouded her thoughts. "Everything seems like a blur," she admitted, frustrated. "But something doesn't add up. I just can't see what it is." Mark paused, carefully considering what Claire had said. "Maybe it's time to look at this from a new perspective," he suggested. "You've been so focused on Ava that maybe you've overlooked other details. Sometimes the answer lies in what we don't see, in what seems insignificant." Claire nodded, absorbing the advice. Mark was right. She had been so fixated on one direction that she might have missed something important. But what? As they talked, Mark was reassuring, offering practical solutions and emotional support. "Maybe we should review all the footage from that day, frame by frame," he suggested. "Something might come up, something you didn't notice before." Claire agreed, relieved to have a plan, a path to follow. "I knew I could count on you, Mark," she said with a weak but sincere smile. "You always know what to do." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, and for a moment, Claire felt that she could trust again, that things would somehow resolve themselves. But there was a shadow, a persistent feeling that the danger hadn't yet passed. Mark suggested that she take a few days to rest, to step away from the whirlwind of thoughts. "You need to regain your strength, Claire. There's no point in torturing yourself like this. We'll handle this together, one step at a time." They parted with a tight hug, and as Claire walked out of the bistro, a slight sense of tranquility began to creep into her mind. Mark had always been her anchor, and once again, he was there, ready to help her navigate through the storm. The days following the conversation with Mark were increasingly tense for Claire. She followed his advice and began reviewing the footage from the day of the accident, frame by frame. The images were disturbing, not just for what they depicted, but for what they suggested. Claire began to dig deeper, calling colleagues and asking for information she hadn't previously considered relevant. It was during one of these conversations that something unexpected happened. One of the technicians, visibly nervous, mentioned a series of emails exchanged between production members and a mysterious figure using a pseudonym. The emails discussed last-minute changes to scenes and even small technical glitches that, when combined, created the perfect setup for the accident. The technician tried to downplay the importance of it, but Claire knew she had stumbled upon something big. Determined to uncover the truth, Claire managed to access those emails. The content was vague, but made it clear that someone was manipulating events behind the scenes. The messages were written in code, but one thing was clear to Claire. The conspiracy was much broader than she'd imagined. She began to map out a mental diagram linking names and events, trying to piece together a complete picture. At the center of it all, an unknown figure was pulling the strings, ensuring that Claire was removed from her role. As Claire delved deeper into the investigation, she came across something even more disturbing. One of the emails, sent the night before the accident, mentioned a final visit to the hospital, as if the accident had already been planned. The words "leave no trace" were repeated several times, sending a chill down Claire's spine. This wasn't just an attempt to sabotage her career. It was a calculated plot, carefully planned to look like a tragic but inevitable accident. Claire began to suspect that the conspiracy involved more people than just members of the technical team. There was one name that kept appearing in the emails, someone she would never have considered a suspect. This name made her stop and reassess everything that had happened since the accident. The feeling of betrayal was almost physical, a blow that left her breathless. Everything began to make sense in a cruel and devastating way. In a moment of clarity, Claire remembered a conversation she had with Mark weeks before the accident. He had mentioned an important contact who could open new doors for her, but at the time, she hadn't paid much attention. Now, those words came back with full force, laden with hidden meanings. Claire felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The person she had always considered her most loyal ally could be directly involved in all of this. She recalled the countless times she had blindly trusted Mark's decisions. The meetings where he insisted on last-minute changes, always justified as what's best for her career. Everything now seemed part of a more sinister plan, orchestrated in the shadows, far from Claire's eyes. Determined to find concrete proof, Claire sifted through old records, contracts, emails, anything that could confirm her suspicions. That's when she found something that left her paralyzed. An exchange of messages between Mark and another influential production member, discussing details about the next step and making sure she doesn't find out. The messages were cold, devoid of any emotion, as if they were discussing a simple strategic move and not the destruction of a life and career. Claire's world collapsed in a deafening silence. As she stared at the messages on the computer screen, she felt the blood pounding in her temples, her heart beating so hard it seemed ready to explode. Mark's name, the person she trusted most, was there, imprinted in every line, every word, revealing a betrayal so deep that Claire could barely believe it. The man who had guided her career from the beginning, who had advised her at crucial moments, was conspiring to destroy her. Claire's first reaction was denial. Something was wrong, maybe a misunderstanding, an unfortunate coincidence. But as she reread the messages, the truth became inescapable. Mark's words were cold, calculating, with no trace of the affection or loyalty he had always shown. He wasn't just involved, he was the architect. Every detail meticulously planned, every move carefully executed to ensure that Claire was removed from the film and possibly from her entire career. All of this in exchange for promises of success for another actress, someone he had for some reason decided was more worthy of his dedication. Memories of past conversations began to resurface, now tinged with new meaning. The times Mark insisted on decisions that didn't make sense at the time. The advice that seemed more to protect his interests than hers, and he used that knowledge against her, exploiting her vulnerabilities to ensure his plan worked. Claire felt betrayed in a way she had never experienced before, as if the ground beneath her feet had disappeared, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainties and despair. Claire knew she had to act, but the idea of confronting Mark filled her with a terror she wasn't prepared to face. He was a master at manipulating situations. And now that she knew what he was capable of, the thought of facing him made her stomach churn. Still, Claire knew there was no other option. The truth was there, exposed like an open wound, and she needed to close it once and for all. There was no turning back. The confrontation was inevitable. Experience and suffering had hardened her, and now she would use that newfound strength to face Mark and dismantle his conspiracy. But the pain of betrayal remained, latent, like a scar that would never completely disappear. Claire arranged to meet Mark in a discreet location, far from the curious eyes that might recognize the famous actress and her agent. She chose a small hidden cafe in the city center, where the late afternoon light filtered softly through the curtains, creating a striking contrast between the cozy atmosphere and the tension hanging in the air. She arrived early, as usual, and sat at a table in the corner with a clear view of the door. Her fingers nervously tapped on the edge of the coffee cup as her mind prepared for what was to come. When Mark finally arrived, Claire felt a mix of repulsion and sadness. He looked the same as always, confident with the familiar smile that had so often calmed her in times of crisis. But now, that smile seemed fake, a carefully constructed mask to hide his true intentions. "Claire, it's good to see you're doing well," he said, sitting down in front of her, unaware of the storm that was brewing. She watched him for a moment, trying to control the anger bubbling up inside her before speaking. "Mark, we have a lot to talk about," Claire began, her voice low but firm. Mark noticed the change in her tone, and the smile faded, replaced by a cautious expression. "What happened, Claire? You seem tense." She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know everything, Mark. I know about the emails, the conversations, about what you did. I know it was you who planned the accident." The words came out of her mouth with a hardness that surprised her, and for a moment the world seemed to stop around them. Mark blinked, visibly shaken, but tried to maintain his composure. "Claire, you must be mistaken. I would never do something like that." The denial was instant, but Claire saw the hesitation in his eyes, a weakness he was trying to hide. She pulled out the papers she had brought with her, the evidence she had gathered. "Don't lie to me, Mark. I have the proof here. I trusted you, and you betrayed me in the most despicable way possible." The impact of those words was palpable. Mark looked at the papers on the table, his expression transforming into something darker, almost desperate. He knew he had been caught. For a moment he tried to argue, but his voice failed. "Claire, I had no choice," he finally murmured, the mask of confidence slipping to reveal the fear and guilt he had been trying to hide. "It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, something I couldn't ignore. But I never wanted you to get hurt. I just wanted everything to be perfect." Claire watched him, feeling a bitter mix of disgust and pity. "Perfect? You almost killed me, Mark. You destroyed everything we built together. All for what? Money? Power? Another actress?" Her voice faltered slightly, but the indignation remained firm. Mark, now pale and sweating, lowered his head, defeated. "I was under pressure, Claire. They promised me things I never imagined. $1 million contract, power in the industry, but I never thought it would go this far. Not like this." The silence that followed was devastating. Claire wanted to scream, wanted him to feel the pain she was feeling, but when she looked at Mark, all she saw was a broken man, consumed by his own ambitions and regrets. He was no longer the loyal friend, the reliable guide who helped her conquer Hollywood. Now, he was just a traitor, a man who chose the path of greed, even if it meant betraying the one person who truly trusted him. "Claire, I'm sorry," he finally whispered, his voice trembling. "I know this doesn't change anything, but I never wanted to hurt you. I made a terrible mistake, and now I'm paying the price. Please forgive me." But Claire knew there was no room for forgiveness. What he had done was unforgivable. Mark's words echoed in her mind, but they couldn't soothe the open wound he had caused. She stood up, grabbing the papers from the table. "I don't know if I will ever be able to forgive you, Mark, but I know I can't let this go." Claire's voice was cold, distant, reflecting the irreparable distance that now existed between them. Mark watched her leave, helpless, knowing that the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. And as Claire walked away, part of her wished things had been different, but another part knew that fate had already been sealed. The night enveloped Claire in a cold, silent embrace as she sat on the couch in her living room, staring at the evidence on the table in front of her. Mark's words still echoed in her mind, but now they felt empty and distant. The decision she was about to make weighed on her heart like a stone. Turning over that evidence meant more than exposing a crime. It meant betraying the person she had until recently considered a friend, an ally on her journey. But Claire knew she had no other choice. She picked up the phone, hesitating before dialing the number for the police station. Each ring seemed to echo in the silent room, bringing to the surface all the emotions she was trying to suppress. When the call was answered, Claire introduced herself and asked to speak with the detective in charge of the case. The voice on the other end of the line was firm but calm, as if accustomed to dealing with difficult situations. Claire took a deep breath before saying, "I have information about the accident and evidence that could incriminate someone very close to me." The detective agreed to meet her the next morning. Claire hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and deep pain. She knew she was doing the right thing, but the thought of seeing Mark arrested, of seeing their friendship completely disintegrate, was almost unbearable. She tried to push away the memories of the good times they had shared, but they came rushing back with force, like ghosts from a past that now seemed distant and unreachable. That night, Claire hardly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark's face, not as the traitor he had revealed himself to be, but as the friend who had always been by her side during the most difficult moments of her career. She remembered the conversations, the laughter, the unconditional support he seemed to offer. But now, all of that was tainted by the cruel truth she had uncovered. Mark's betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. A knife plunged into her back by someone she never would have suspected. In the morning, Claire prepared to leave, each movement weighed down by a silent sadness. She placed the documents in a folder, trying not to think about what it meant. The drive to the police station was made in silence, the streets passing by in a blur as she struggled to keep calm. When she arrived, the detective was already waiting for her. He greeted her with a solemn nod, sensing the gravity of the situation just from Claire's expression. Without many words, she handed the folder to him, feeling a sharp pain as she let it go. As the detective flipped through the documents, Claire explained what she had discovered. Her voice was firm, but there was a tone of bitterness and disillusionment she couldn't hide. The detective listened carefully, asking pointed questions but always with an understanding look. He understood the weight of the decision Claire had made and didn't try to minimize her pain. "This won't be easy," he said finally. "But you did the right thing." The weight of betrayal and loss was now real, tangible, and she knew it would take a long time to overcome. Every step she took away from the police station made her feel emptier, as if she were walking toward an uncertain future, without the certainties that had once guided her. The days following the handover of the evidence were filled with overwhelming loneliness for Claire. She withdrew from the glitz and hustle of Hollywood, choosing to isolate herself in her Malibu home, far from curious eyes and the incessant questions from the press. The ocean, which had always brought her peace, now seemed like a mirror of her own internal turmoil. The waves crashed against the rocks with relentless force, reflecting the storm of emotions she was trying to control. Mark's betrayal had left deep scars, and for the first time in years, Claire felt lost, without direction. She began to avoid any news or contact with the film world. The scripts that used to bring her excitement now lay untouched in a dusty pile on her office desk. The walls of the house, filled with awards and memories of a brilliant career, now felt suffocating, constantly reminding her of the price she had paid for her rise. Claire needed space, time to process everything that had happened, and above all, she needed to rediscover who she was beyond the famous actress. It was during one of those lonely mornings, while walking barefoot on the cold sand, that Claire began to reflect on her life outside the spotlight. What was left when the cameras stopped rolling? Who was she without the roles she played? She started painting again, an old hobby she had set aside years ago. The vibrant colors she applied to the canvases were an attempt to bring back the vitality she felt she had lost. Painting became a form of therapy, a way to vent the pain and confusion that still haunted her. Each brushstroke was a step toward healing, an effort to rebuild the parts of herself that had been destroyed by the betrayal. But even so, the emptiness persisted, a shadow that refused to completely disappear. In addition to painting, Claire got involved in volunteer work, something that kept her connected with people in a genuine and unpretentious way. She helped at local shelters, offered theater classes to underprivileged youth, and organized events to raise funds for social causes. These moments of generosity and connection reminded her that there was still goodness in the world, that not everything was lost. And slowly, Claire began to find small fragments of hope amidst the darkness. Despite her efforts, Claire still felt restless. There was a hole in her soul that painting and volunteer work couldn't completely fill. She knew she was running from something, trying to fill the void left by Hollywood and the loss of confidence in herself. Staying away from film seemed the only way to survive the whirlwind. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something vital was missing. It was as if she had left an essential part of herself behind. Time passed, but the wound was still there, painful and open. Claire refused to return to the world that had betrayed her, but the passion for acting, for storytelling, still burned within her. Yet, even amidst the pain and confusion, Claire knew she had to move forward. She couldn't remain hidden forever, avoiding the world she loved so much. But before she could return, before she could even consider resuming her career, she needed to find herself. She needed to know that, regardless of what happened, she was more than the roles she played, more than the fame and awards. She was Claire Sullivan, a woman who, despite everything, still had much to offer. As she gazed at the endless horizon, Claire made the decision to stay away for a little longer. She knew that eventually she would face her demons, but for now, her heart needed rest. The days in Malibu passed slowly, with Claire immersed in her new routine, trying to keep any thoughts that connected her to the world of cinema at bay. She felt safe in her bubble, distant from the pressures and painful memories. However, something inside her remained restless, a flame that, despite her determination to ignore it, continued to burn quietly. It was on a quiet morning, while Claire was painting on the porch, that her phone rang, breaking the calm. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something compelled her to answer. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, one of Hollywood's most renowned directors, someone whose reputation for creating iconic films preceded him. "Claire, I'm working on a project that would be perfect for you," he said, with an enthusiasm Claire hadn't heard in a long time. She remained silent for a moment, surprised by both the call and the proposal itself. It was as if the universe was testing her resolve to stay away. "I'm flattered, but I don't know if I'm ready to return," she replied, with a sincerity that surprised even herself. The director, however, was not willing to give up so easily. "I understand what you've been through, Claire, but this role, it's different from anything you've ever done. It's deep, complex, and requires someone with your experience and intensity. I know you're the only actress capable of bringing this character to life. I know there's still so much inside you that the world needs to see." His words touched something inside Claire, something she had tried to suppress since the accident. The idea of losing herself in a new role, of rediscovering her passion, began to plant a seed of doubt in her resolution to stay away. In the days that followed, Claire couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. She revisited the script the director had sent, reading and rereading the lines marked for the protagonist. The story was powerful, full of emotional nuances that spoke directly to her heart. It was a narrative of redemption, of finding strength after a devastating fall, something that resonated deeply with the journey she herself was living. The role seemed made for her, as if destiny was calling her back. As Claire walked along the beach with the script in hand, she began to wonder if her withdrawal was really what she needed. Perhaps the true healing lay in reconnecting with what she had always loved, what had defined her for so many years. Acting wasn't just a career for Claire. It was her way of expressing herself, of connecting with the world and with herself. and no matter how much she tried to flee, this calling seemed impossible to ignore. Every line in the script felt like a whisper, reminding her of why she fell in love with acting in the first place. The temptation to accept the offer grew stronger every day, and Claire found herself torn between the fear of getting hurt again and the need to rediscover herself. She consulted her closest friends, those who had stood by her through the storm, and they all encouraged her to follow her heart. Finally, on a sunny afternoon, Claire made her decision. Sitting on the porch with the phone in her hand, she dialed the director's number, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. When he answered, she took a deep breath and said, "I accept." The response was immediate, filled with enthusiasm and relief. "You won't regret it, Claire. This film is going to be incredible, and with you in it, it will be even better than I imagined." When the call ended, Claire felt a wave of emotions wash over her body. The decision had been made, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope. In the days that followed, Claire began preparing for the role. She dove into the script, studying every detail, every nuance of the character. The flame she had tried to extinguish was now burning brightly, reigniting the love she had always felt for acting, and so, Claire found herself on the threshold of a new journey, with a heart full of uncertainties, but also a renewed passion. The offer she couldn't refuse had brought back the woman she had always been, reminding her that despite betrayals and falls, the love for the art still pulsed within her, stronger than ever. When Claire Sullivan returned to Hollywood, something within her had changed. She was no longer the woman who had left the city months before, devastated by betrayal and loss. Now, there was a fierce determination in her eyes, an unshakable flame that lit up every step she took. Her re-entry into the film industry was met with murmurs of surprise and admiration. Everyone expected a weakened, hesitant Claire, but what they found was a stronger, more confident actress, ready to reclaim her place at the top. The set of the new film she agreed to star in was filled with anticipation. The director, known for his perfectionism, could not hide his excitement at having her on the cast. In the first few days, Claire noticed curious glances and whispers among the crew. She knew that everyone was watching, waiting to see if she still had the spark that had made her a star. But Claire wasn't there to prove anything to anyone except herself. And every scene she filmed was an affirmation that she was in control, more than ever. The first weeks of filming were intense, and Claire threw herself completely into the role, bringing to the character all the depth and complexity that her own experience had given her. Every line, every expression was filled with the truth that only someone who had known pain could convey. The crew began to notice this, and the silent admiration turned into palpable respect. Claire wasn't just an actress returning to work. She was a force of nature, using her art to turn pain into something beautiful and powerful. During breaks in filming, Claire had deep conversations with the director and her fellow cast members. She was more open than ever, sharing her visions about life, art, and what it really meant to give oneself to a role. These interactions were filled with a new wisdom, born of the scars she carried. Claire realized that by opening up more to others, she was allowing herself to trust again, but now with a caution that came from someone who had learned, the hard way, the value of true loyalty. The tabloids, always ready to exploit the weaknesses of celebrities, tried to create narratives about her return, but Claire gave them no room for it. She was focused on her work, ignoring the rumors and gossip. The interviews she gave were sincere but firm, and soon the media realized that Claire was no longer the woman who could be easily brought down by scandals or betrayals. She had become an almost mythical figure, a woman who had faced the abyss and returned stronger, more determined to carve her own path. Each day of filming, Claire felt that something inside her was being rebuilt, as if the broken pieces of her heart were coming together again, but in a new, more resilient way. The most emotional scenes, those that demanded everything she had, were the ones that challenged her the most, but also the ones that healed her the most. She poured her soul into every moment, and in doing so, she felt that she was finally leaving the past behind. The art that once almost destroyed her was now rebuilding her. When the film finally wrapped, there was a sense of accomplishment, not just for Claire, but for the entire crew. They knew they had created something special, something that bore the mark of an actress reborn from the ashes. The director in particular was ecstatic. "Claire, you didn't just return, you surpassed yourself. This film, it's the best work of your career," he said, with a smile of gratitude and respect. Claire, for the first time in a long while, felt that she was exactly where she was meant to be. At the film's premiere events, Claire walked the red carpet with her head held high, without the shadow of doubt or fear that had once accompanied her. The cameras captured every move, every smile, but now she did not feel vulnerable under the flashes. She was in control of her own narrative, and no one could take that away from her. The audience, upon watching the film, was in awe, amazed by the depth of Claire's performance. She hadn't just returned, she had redefined what it meant to be an actress in Hollywood. And so, Claire Sullivan re-established herself as one of the greatest actresses of her generation, but this time with a new perspective. She knew that trust was precious, something to be given carefully, but she also understood that ambition, when guided by truth and passion, could be a force for good. Claire had left the past behind, but had transformed it into a solid foundation for her future. Now, with her triumphant return, she was ready to rewrite her story, not as the woman who was betrayed, but as the woman who, despite everything, triumphed. If you enjoyed Claire's incredible story, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. If you love emotional chronicles and want to support our channel to continue bringing more quality content, consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the first pinned comment. Your help is essential for us to keep improving. Thank you for your support. Until the next emotional chronicle.